Welcome to Flowcast, a podcast of the Dominican Sisters of Springfield, Illinois. I'm Sister Beth Murphy. Last spring, during our congregation's general chapter, we made a commitment to one another and to God and to the church to walk together into a future of intercultural living. Well, the concept of interculturality often raises more questions than it answers. What does it mean? Why does it matter? And how do we get there? Meaning, how do we attune ourselves to living prophetically enough to provide a foundation for a world of flourishing for people of every culture, race, and creed? Indeed, how do we create a world that comes closer to the beloved kingdom Jesus proclaimed? To help answer those questions, I'm joined today by a dear Dominican brother and friend who has given his life to this task. Father Jean-Jacques Perennis is a member of the French province of Dominicans. Today, he joins me from Lille in France, where he is living with the novice brothers for his community and sharing with them decades of experience as a religious brother and priest who has spent his life in Muslim contexts. Oran and Algiers in Algeria, Cairo in Egypt, Jerusalem, Baghdad, and Mosul. Father Jean-Jacques is a pastor and teacher, a scholar and author of many essays and books about the nexus between Christianity and Islam. We could fill an entire Flowcast season with his vast, intimate wisdom about the cultural worlds of Islam. But we won't. He and I agreed to focus on his knowledge about one prominent Egyptian Dominican scholar, Father Georges Anawati. We will count on Father Jean-Jacques' extensive knowledge of Father Anawati to provide a window into this concept of interculturality, seeing what we can tease out from the life of Father Anawati about the kind of respect, curiosity, and openness that allows us to live harmoniously and meaningfully across cultural boundaries. Welcome, Jean-Jacques. How are you?
Welcome. Great to be with you. Wonderful.
It's so good to see you. So let's get started. I'd like, if you would, for you to share your own interest in Muslim-Christian dialogue. What happened to set you on this path?
Well, sometimes God provides you a way of starting something. In France, we were due to do military service some years ago when I was young. And so at that time, we had another option. If you had already some degree, you could go abroad to teach, or as a doctor or something. So I was sent to Algeria to be a professor of economics. I was doing economical studies at that time. And so I was sent there by the Ministry by France. And I found myself very happy. And so when I came back, my provincial told me, well, you look happy there. After your studies, maybe you could go back. I said, yeah, why not? So I was sent back again and spent 10 years in Algeria. This was my first assignment, really, in an Arab country.
Mm-hmm. So it was just by, we say in English, the luck of the draw. You were sent to Algeria and you found a home there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. For me, friendship has been very important immediately, and I think this is important as well in Anawati's life, I think friendship opens doors. When you are friends with somebody, then you can disagree, but first build friendship.
That is such a simple but such an important concept,
Yeah.
And I think you're fully aware of Father Anawati's life and the way he approached interculturality because you've written a biography of him. The one that you wrote in France was some time ago, maybe a decade ago.
Well, 20 years ago, even 20 years, yes. I arrived in Cairo in 2000. And his office was still there, with all his books. And at one day, because people respected so much, his memory, and one day I needed the room for somebody else who was alive. I said to the brothers, well, look, there's somebody, a young guy coming here, a young brother. I need a place for him. And when I started to file his documents, I found so many interesting things. I said to myself, I should write something out of that. So this was the first book. And recently, that's true, I wrote another one, but for another public, mainly Muslim public, and Arab public, because you cannot put the things in the same way. But I will explain that later if you wish.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in. So you wrote, the original book was in French for a French-speaking audience,
Yeah.
perhaps in Cairo, but also in France, and among scholars of Islam and Muslim Christian dialogue. I'm sure they were all very interested in the book. But then you recently more or less rewrote that text in Arabic. So I'd like to hear you talk about that.
Yes, Anawati founded an institute, Dominican Institute for Oriental Studies, called 𝐎𝐧𝐞 in French. It was founded in 1953. And it is the institute, by the way, who has recently asked me to write another version. Mainly, they want to have a presentation of the founder and of the institute for Muslim public. For example, when you speak, Anawati was very much involved, for example, in Vatican II Council, preparing texts like Nostra Aetate about the relationship with Muslim, Jews, and so on. But you cannot talk about Vatican II Council in the same way for Christians who more or less understand what it is about, and for Muslims, especially if they don't have an idea of it. So you have to explain what is a council, what is a bishop, what was the point of. So I decided, and there was the first question, and there was another question. At the end of his life, Anawati had some trouble with some Muslim scholars who were quite tough on him. And I didn't really discuss that clearly in my first biography. But since that, we have more documents, so I decided to say more explicitly what happened. So in some ways, the new book brings something new as well.
So you just said two things that I'd like to explore a little more. I had no idea that Father Anawati was involved at the time of the Second Vatican Council. Can you tell us more about what he was doing?
First, I should say something about his biography. He was born in 1905 in Alexandria, so Egypt, but his family was coming from Syria. They were in some ways exiled in the 1860s, where there were a lot of trouble against Christians. So many Christians from Lebanon, Syria came to Egypt at that time. So they settled in Algeria, in Egypt. He was very interested by studies and read a lot of philosophy, different things, and joined the order when he was Dominican order just when he was 29, so not very young. And he did his study of philosophy and theology in France, but he did as well before that. His father wanted that. He studied pharmacy and chemistry. Yes, both of them, and got degrees, And so when he came back to Egypt, after studies in Algeria, he wanted to create a center really building bridges between Christianity and Muslim culture. And his choice was to study the medieval Arab philosophy. And he became a great expert of Averroes, Avicenna, Ghazali, these main authors. And his point was to say, when we discuss about philosophy, there are no problems. We are all scholars. Christian, Muslim, it doesn't matter. We can work together very easily. Also, he was able to really to build a credibility. He became somebody well respected in Egypt because he was a real scholar and had a good knowledge of Islam. His first important books, published in 1948, was Introduction to the Muslim Theology. In some ways, he went to listen to the Muslim scholars, those who are teaching, let us say, Islamic theology. And he tried to explain to a Western public what is that, because we think it's not the same as, for example, in Islam, the law, canon law, the fiqh is very important, much more important than in Christianity. So he was able really to have a new introduction to that. And this is why when in 1962-63, Vatican II Council started, they wanted to address the issue of relationship with non-Christian religions, mainly Judaism and Islam. And Anawati was called as an expert. So sorry, a bit long maybe, but we need to explain the process, how he was involved in that. And he played a role very important in the drafting of Nostra Aetate, which is a text of Vatican II about the non-Christian religions. And he became then an expert in Vatican dicastery, and he played a very important role. Yeah.
So I'm interested. You said his family. He was Egyptian born, or he was Syrian born?
He was Egyptian born, but his grandfather came from Syria.
Okay.
And they were Orthodox, by the way. They were Orthodox, and he became himself a Catholic when he was a young student at the Christian Brothers School in Alexandria. He joined the Catholic Church.
So when you say he was Orthodox Syriac or Orthodox Assyrian, what do you know?
Syriac Orthodox.
Syriac Orthodox.
Yeah.
And then so for our listeners, this is what I discovered when I was traveling in the Middle East, that there's often two branches of the same faith, one Orthodox that is not in communion with Rome,
exactly,
and the other that is in communion with Rome. So what you're saying is that he left the Orthodox Syriac faith and became Latin Catholic or Roman Catholic?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was even quite odd because I found in his archive a document, I don't know the word in English, but in French we say abjuration. You say something, I refuse this, I have nothing to do with what I professed before. Very, very tough,
Yeah.
I hope that now it's not necessary, but at that time it was quite difficult. This was, in the 30s.
Sure. Yeah, interesting. In the 30s, as he was a young man. Okay. And then you mentioned also, well, let's see, where do we want to go here? When he wrote this book, An Introduction to Muslim Theology, or Islamic Theology, probably, who was his audience for that text? Students?
Well, I think the audience was mainly in the West, because in the West, people didn't know anything about that, And there was a famous scholar who told afterwards, it is this book which took this knowledge out of the madrasa. The madrasa are the Muslim faculties, let us say.
Right.
And nobody had an idea what was taught over there, And Anawati's book was able really to bring into the West. It was a very important book, very important book.
I would be very interested. We can't go into it today, but what it sparks in my imagination is what was the influence of his book in paving the way for acceptance of practitioners of Islam in the West. But I don't know that we have time to exactly do that. Yeah. But
in some way, to understand the other and to create bridges and even dialogue, first you need to make some steps towards him or her,
Yeah, right.
You don't need to put it in the same frame, For example, in the Catholic Church, we have a frame. We have a fundamental theology. We study scripture. You have ecclesiology. You have canon law. But in Islam, it's totally different. So if you want to understand Islam, first you have to make the effort to introduce in your own vision, their way of studying, which is very important.
Well, and that's true of the relationship between Christians and Muslims, but it's true about any cultural divide that we're trying to bridge. And you spoke about how important friendship is in your own life, and that was a hallmark of Father Anawati's life.
Anawati had an amazing gift for friendship. Amazing gift. There are many stories about him.
Well,
Once
tell
he
us
was,
some.
yes, once he was in a congress somewhere abroad, and there was a sheikh, quite severe Shia, and Anawati told to his neighbor, "Look, I'm going to sit with him. Within 5 minutes, he will be laughing," and he did. Very efficient, doing a lot of jokes, and creating some sense of humor, and then you can talk, Yeah.
That is so interesting. Do you have another story?
Well, I should think about it, but yes,
Yeah,
certainly.
yeah. So I think you had an opportunity to meet Father Anawati. He died in
Yes.
1994. Is that right?
Yes. So I met him a few times in the decade before. I was already within the Dominicans, and sometimes we have chapters, we have meetings, and I had an opportunity to meet him. And I visited Cairo for the first time in January 92. He was still there, quite old, but so I knew him, and we had the friars, seeing how he was getting old, one evening told him, let us sit together, and we put a microphone and we tell some stories to Father Jean-Jacques. So in some ways, they started to prepare a kind of biography. And this has been published later as well, a short,
Oh, neat.
an hour conversation about how he was born, where he studied, his friends. He used to like to play football, for example, when he was young, things like that, And then his studies, when he joined, for example, the Dominicans, he had to leave Egypt, and it's in the east. Everything is dramatic. So he went on the boat, and his brother went to tell him, "Your mother is going to die." It's so funny, and he was laughing about that. Yeah,
Everything is always dramatic. You are right. Everything
yeah.
is a big story. What do you think, in addition to the beautiful stories that you've already told me, what have you learned personally from Father Anawati or from any others that you've encountered
Yes.
that can be helpful to other people, to our listeners here in Central Illinois? What can we take from your
Yeah, yeah.
life story?
I think first to realize that when you want to create a link or a bridge with somebody else, you have to be aware of his diversity. I don't know if the word alterity exists in English, but in French we say ça, l'altérité de l'autre. The other is different, is not like me, and be aware of that. Don't try to copy always first. Secondly, it's important to have skills. If you want to create really a good relationship, and Anawati was a good specialist of Arabic philosophy, but as well he did scientific studies. He was a pharmacist, and so he wrote books about the Arabic pharmacy and medicine in the Middle Ages, and he was invited to lecture on that. He was as well had a good knowledge of the Muslim medieval philosophers, Avicenna, Averroes, Al-Ghazali. So I would say having skills is very important. And then the other side, to have the friendship. Because skills allow you to discuss. But if you enter in difficult issues, you need to be friends as well, especially when we move to interreligious questions. But Anawati's point was to say, we shouldn't start by that. We shouldn't start by religious questions. Let us start by, life issues, our common humanity, or intellectual issues as scholars, And then when you have created enough confidence between each other, you may start to discuss religious questions,
Mm-hmm.
And it is interesting because as well, and at his time, it was mainly in the 50s, even 60s, we didn't have the strong polarization we have today about, the radical Islam, Daesh. All that didn't exist, You had the Muslim Brothers, who was a branch of Islam in Egypt, but they were controlled, In the time of Nasser, most of them were in jail, like today, by the way. That so it was not a big issue. So you could create really easy relationship with many other Muslim scholars. So I would say that first to realize that the other is different. Be aware of that. Secondly, have skills, to be able to enter in a real discussion. And thirdly, create friendship. If you have all that, you can do a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. I love that word alterity. I don't know how often it gets used in English, but we do hear it occasionally. And that is no small thing. In the United States, sometimes we have this idea that our reality is the correct reality. And everyone else's reality is, I won't say wrong, but other. That's a challenge for us as citizens of the United States to even recognize the otherness of the other as valid and something worth exploring and being respectful of.
It is very important not only in the States, in the West, because we have been powerful countries, even with, some strong pressure on some colonies, and, we don't realize the wounds sometimes we have created, And so if we want to respect the otherness, I think this is a good word, the otherness of the other, you have as well to listen to his story or her story, and to be aware of the possible wounds which are there, And often there are a lot of wounds,
Yes.
This is very important. So a kind of healing in some ways, to have a real mutual and equal relationship, not one up and the other down, to have it's kind of the same level. You have to be respectful and to be aware of the wounds which have been often sometimes. And I see now the relationships between Muslim and the West often are affected by that, because there are still in the memory of the people some very deep wounds which have not been addressed or healed.
Yes, I think that's true. And again, I can only speak from my own context, but immigrants who come here because they want to live in a place that's safe for their children and where their families can thrive often have to suppress what you're calling the wounds in order to fit in here. And I'm not sure that suppression is always a good thing.
Yes, because I think if the relationship is mutual, we have to get something as well from them, And the West is not used to that. We're always bringing something. We bring the science, we bring the technology, we bring the money, but maybe in this relationship, we can get something important as well. And I think all the some of the migrants coming to our countries are teaching us some very important thing about life, about family, about the respect of the older ones, for example, So it is important to learn from them as well,
Very much. And when I was working in the Detroit metro area, helping to resettle Iraqi refugee families, I always tried to tell that to them, that they were welcome in the United States and we were happy to have them here, but that they had something to give us. And what I saw so often within the families that I was working with was that sense of family and their commitment to their loved ones and their joy and celebration. I said, those are all gifts that you bring to us. Please don't lose that energy, that life, that deep commitment to your faith and your family,
The dramatic moment we are living in the world now is that we see most of our powerful countries trying to build bridges, You have that in the United States with Mexico, but we have that in Europe as well, We are afraid of getting so many people from Algeria, Morocco, Kurds, Syria, Eritreans, and certainly we need to control something. But on the other hand, we cannot, this is life, If they are going through terrible situation, we have to receive them, I have a very good friend who had to leave Gaza, 2 months ago with his 6 children. They have been under the bombs for 18 months. And now, thanks to a Swiss archaeologist, he was able to bring them in Geneva. So they are settling there slowly. But the father tell me, my children now need a psychiatrist. Because they have been under the bombing for months and months. They don't sleep, they poor kids. So I think in some ways, we have duties as well.
Yes, we have responsibilities as brothers and sisters, as human beings, to care for one
Exactly.
another.
Exactly.
And yeah, it doesn't help when we have our politicians and elected officials trying to stir up that fear for their own purposes, does it?
I would like to add something which is important for me. I'm 76 and I spent 41 years out of my country. And most of them were in Arab countries. And I was in the minority. And for me, it has been a real chance, an important thing to be in the minority. Because when you are in the minority, you are not arrogant. And you try to learn from the others. And I think this is the problem of the West. We are the majority, we have the money, we have the technology, we have all that, we have the weapons, and so we are not really able to welcome something from the others. It is not
Yes.
naive. It's not naive. It was not always easy for me, but I learned so much, out of this precise situation. So I think for interculturality is a real challenge. You want to go back to the topic, is a real challenge. It is not an easy one, but I think it's essential for our countries because now we are in a globalized world. And if we really want to be able to live together peacefully, we have to create a kind of atmosphere, where the other is more welcome in a context which has been settled. And I'm not saying we have to bring everyone, but I mean, we have to organize that, but to have, as a human beings, a kind of attitude of welcome.
I'd like to ask you a few more questions about that, if I may.
Sure.
You were in the minority when you were in Algeria, when you were in Egypt, when you were in Jerusalem. How did you learn how to deal with what was challenging about that? What supported your efforts to live as a minority in a culture that was not your own?
Well, the first challenge was the language. Arabic is not an easy language, so really you have to make an important effort to be able to create an easier relationship with the other. But I have been happy always, mainly. I enjoy that. I enjoy the music. I enjoy the food. I enjoy the atmosphere of the families. Lots of kids around, and the kids wonderful with the old grandparents. I enjoy that. So, yes, and for me, the kingdom of God has something to do with that. To have a world where everyone has its or her place, with his or her diversity, to enjoy the diversity. So for me, it was not really difficult, but yes, I had to be aware that I was a guest.
Mm-hmm. And in those situations, were you living in community with your Dominican brothers, and were they mostly from France, or where were they from?
Yes, mainly. Yes, in Algeria, we were all from France. In Egypt, we are mainly from France, but we are two or three from other countries. In Jerusalem, it was more international with Mexican, Americans, Indians, but yes.
Mhm.
So, yes, but as well, to belong to a community was very important, because you need to sometimes to find the energy somewhere. Community and prayer, I would say prayer as well, very important, because a prayer is a place where you can discuss in some ways all that, all the thank God for the joys and ask for help for the difficulties.
Mhm. Yes.
Sometimes, the pain was, for example, with good Muslim friends, The pain was that to see that the otherness will remain, For example, I cannot explain Trinity. Even with Christians, it's difficult. But with a Muslim, for them, it's a kind of polytheism, to have three-person polytheism. You cannot explain that. And when you are with a Muslim, you can be tough about God, but never be tough about Muhammad, because you have a deep respect for Muhammad. And we in the West, because we know the biography of Muhammad, we say, well, he was not so, So this was it was a bit painful sometimes to measure that there are some areas where it is very sensitive. So respect that.
Mm-hmm.
When you deal with somebody wounded, be careful.
That's important advice.
Yeah.
And to be attentive to our own woundedness too, because it's often with our own undiscovered wounds that we wound others, huh?
Sure. When you see the disaster of many families in the West at the moment, I don't know in the US, but in Europe it is the case, And when I go in Palestine or Egypt, where I see the joy in these families, there are many. It's a bit chaos, And a kid more, two kids more. How are we going to deal with that? Well, welcome. God gave them to us, And there is a joy over there, So in some ways, we should learn out from that, without being naive, but something which is important for us.
Yes, I think in cultures where there is much challenge, there's also much joy. And that's something we in the West can learn, I think, certainly. Jean-Jacques, thank you so much. This has been a powerful conversation for me, and I hope it will be as well for those who listen to us, to understand the importance of friendship and the reality of other people's lives, that we can, walk gently into relationships with people from cultures that we don't understand and become friends. That is truly what it means to build bridges and to begin to create the beloved kingdom, to begin to create the intercultural world that we need it, or we're going to destroy ourselves. And to have you in my life as a bridge in a way has been very important.
I was going to say something about that, because your audience doesn't know, but we have been together in Iraq, in very difficult moments. And you, as an American, you were very courageous and very brave to dare to go there. You came with us, and so we have built, you and myself, over more than 20 years, a deep mutual trust, which allows us to do a lot of things, and it's a real joy that.
Yeah. And I think the people who listen to us, it'll be our sisters and associates of our community, people who know something about our Dominican mission in the United States. But to be able to share with them this broader global understanding, this little window into the role of Dominicans in the East and among people who practice Islam, it's a window that we haven't shared often. So I'm very grateful to be able to bring that to our friends. And maybe we'll have to do this again.
Why not?
Not a whole season with you, but maybe another episode, because I'd like some time to talk about another person quite dear to you who has become kind of a hero for me in my own vocation, and that's Pierre Claverie. So another time we'll talk about Pierre.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
All right.
This next year it will be 30 years anniversary of his death. Amazing.
That's right.
We're preparing quite a good program here in France. And Algeria, tomorrow I have a Zoom meeting with the Bishop of Oran to prepare something about that.
That's fantastic, and that will give us a good excuse to talk about Pierre next season.
Okay.
I will look forward to that.
God bless.
You too, Jean-Jacques. And just a note for our listeners, there'll be some resources in the show notes for this edition of Flowcast at our website, which is flowcastlisten.org. If you've enjoyed this conversation with my brother Jean-Jacques, please tell your friends about it and send them the link and invite them to subscribe so they don't miss a single episode. A big thanks to Flowcast engineer and editor Brandon Durham and to marketing guru Jean Ann Miller. We could not do it without either one of them. And a final thank you to my friend Jean-Jacques. What a joy. What a joy to talk to you.
Bye.
The Flow in Flowcast is an acronym for the life of the world. A reminder that all of us are called to imitate Jesus' self-giving for the life of the world. Until next time, I'm Sister Beth Murphy, inviting you to consider joining this big, wild global family that we call the Order of Preachers as a sister or a brother, a contemplative nun, a lay member of the order, or an associate. If you are interested, be in touch.